right, I think we could go ahead and get started. So this is our last guest speaker for the school year. Yeah. Um, and so it's an honor to have our guest speaker, Maisha Kamunde-Devonish. So one of the really cool things about her at this point in her career life is that she's finishing up a postdoc at University of California, Irvine, and she already has a position waiting for her at Grinnell College. Just found out that's in Iowa, and that's always a great relief. Finding a job after you graduate or something. It's yeah. So our speaker today is in that transition mode from being a postdoc, which is something you could do after you do your doctorate in many of the sciences, and moving into Grinnell College, which is a small college. I don't know what it compares. Do you know? Comparison? Okay. Okay. Is it our size, you think? Is it about our size? Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So, so we end our series today looking not at technical chemistry, physics, or anything like that. What we're looking at today is a very important aspect of being a scientist in today's world, which is we have an obligation to actually communicate to the public in non-technical yet not dumbed down language. They pay for a lot of our research through taxes and stuff, the general public does. So we have that obligation, plus that our society is a lot more technological, scientific based. So being able to have that conversation between the scientists, research scientists, and the public is a very important function. And so today, as we close out our seminar series, our topic today is the Handbook on Science Communication. And it's a pleasure to have you here with us for this presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Murray. First, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to give this talk. I'm really excited. This has been an area of interest to me for quite some time. And thank you to all of you, students and faculty alike, for being here to listen to me talk about this. This is a great opportunity to learn a little bit about a different aspect of science that can oftentimes be missed, but is very important nowadays. And so what I'd like to talk to you today about is science communication in general, both from what I have done based upon research as well as what I have looked at in practice. And what I hope that you gain from today's talk and what I hope I can convey to you today is something of a twofold effect. First, I hope that all of this information can be a helpful guide for you as you continue to engage in public engagement, science communication yourself. And if you have not already done so and do find that it's interesting to you, I hope that it'll also encourage you to participate in the process, because as we know nowadays particularly, it's very important for scientists to engage with the public, not only locally, but also on a national as well as a global level. So as mentioned, I am the Communicating Chemistry Postdoctoral Fellow for the NSF-funded Center for Selective CH Bond Functionalization. Very long title, but what it really means is that in addition to doing research, I also am responsible for finding modes of communication that are effective for the kind of chemistry that we do. And so what I've come across is that, or one of the ways that we've gone about trying to communicate chemistry on a widespread level is through science festivals. And here I'm showing a number of the different festivals that we've participated in over the last couple of years, including this year. Oddly enough, come this Friday, my group and I will be heading down to San Diego once again to participate in their science festival. So this talk kind of comes around at a very convenient time. But we've gone through a number of different festivals, and one of the main reasons as to why we chose science festivals is that at festivals there's a high number or a high volume of individuals there, and you can interact with a lot of people in a short amount of time. This is very important, especially with trying to communicate chemistry, that you can engage as many people as possible. And what we found is that science festivals can be a place where this can happen. However, one of the biggest issues that we faced, and I think is a problem that many scientists face when going through the process of science communication, is how do we brand CCHF chemistry to a non-specialist audience? We think about science festivals, oftentimes we are interacting with people who are not in the field of chemistry, specifically stage bond activation themselves. But how do we brand our chemistry in reality? How does anybody brand the chemistry that they're trying to talk about to a non-specialist audience? So the first thing that we have to consider is, what is science communication? What is it in general? We talk about it a lot. It's very common jargon that's thrown around. But what we do realize is that it comes as in a twofold process. You have science communication as well as public engagement, which are kind of talked about interchangeably under the umbrella of science outreach. When we talk about science communication, what this often refers to is one-way transmission of knowledge from science experts to the public. And so, for example, we can think of this as a classroom lecture or me talking to you about science communication. This is what we refer to as communication. But this is in contrast to public engagement, which is oftentimes a mutual learning experience for not only the person conveying information, i.e. a scientist, but also the audience that is receiving that information. And it also requires a number of different interactions. This can be passive or active interaction, but oftentimes it's engagement and dialogue between the scientists and the public. But these terms tend to be frequently used interchangeably, which oftentimes leads to confusion about what is one versus the other. But in reality, they all fit under this umbrella of science outreach, which is really the operative goal that we have, is to get science out into the community. And so it can be a bit convoluted using these technical terms or trying to use them in their most accurate and technical sense. And so the thing is that what we're really talking about here is any scientific communication that directly engages an audience outside of academia. That's the big premise of it all. We are trying to reach people who are not in academia and oftentimes also not in scientific industry. We're trying to engage that group of people. So now that we know that science communication can be thought of as public engagement and vice versa, and both are under the umbrella of science outreach, we get to another question, and that is, why does any of this matter? So there are 4 arguments for science education, and these serve as the classifications, at least the most idealized classifications, for the motivations that scientists have to do science communication, or they at least should be the motivations for scientists to do communication. One of those arguments is this utilitarian one, where learners can benefit from science by gaining skills they can utilize from what they've learned. So we can think about this as a newfound knowledge that will raise awareness and give some sense of the impact of the benefits of science. If people are able to engage and do the science themselves or see the process, they might understand why it's important for us to do it, and it might encourage them to decide that they want to pursue it further, or they have more empathy in the area of science and the work that scientists do and would be more interested in helping scientists further their progress. It helps to fuel discovery and in a sense of encouraging people to have that empathy for science, and the process of doing science can change behaviors as well as opinions and attitudes towards science. And ideally, these changes in behavior and attitude can be for the better, i.e. for the benefit of us as scientists. There's also the economic argument for science education, in which we all know that if we are technologically advanced, we can sustain ourselves economically, we can grow, and we can also be competitive. We can either be competitive internationally, we can be competitive domestically, but in reality, what it is about is that more technology means more advancement for us as a whole, as well as sustained growth. And this competition, this growth, this economy can lead to additional innovation, always trying to make more improvements, trying to make things better. If we have this economic push, we are striving for innovation. Also, at the same time, if the public sees that there is this advancement, this push, this success and growth, that can also encourage support from the public to fund projects that are going to help move us forward. So we can think about this in the sense of furthering methods of sustainable energy in the light of climate change. We can assume, or we can make the suggestions that if we put more towards these ideas of renewable energy, that can be profitable for us, and that can be of a benefit to all of us as a whole. There's also the cultural argument, and this is really one of the ones that I think is important but can oftentimes be lost. Here, what we think of is the fact that science in and of itself is a cultural achievement. We think of Jonas Salk here, who found the vaccination for polio. We think of Einstein. We think of astronauts like Mae Jemison, who were able to explore beyond our reach on Earth. These are things that are achievements that have happened throughout human history, and science really can be on the forefront and is on the forefront of these various achievements. And we can look at it, and we can look at as science as a successful reflection on ourselves in society. What these things can also do is that by encouraging this cultural argument for science education, we can inspire the next generation of scientists. And at the same time, if we think about it, all of the past discoveries that came before what we currently do today are really a manifestation of what we're doing today. We have built on the foundation of these different scientific discoveries, and we are a part of this history. We are living history, at least in terms of science. And so that really makes us the gatekeepers of scientific history. Without scientists, this history could die. Therefore, we need to push it forward, and hopefully with continued generations of scientists. Then there's also the democratic argument for science education. We all know that as much as people are versed in a variety of, in many information, scientific or otherwise, the more the public knows, the more informed decisions they can make. And this is really important when we think about different policies that can be put into place. As if people are informed about what is going on and what we're trying to achieve, they can make informed decisions based on pure logic, as well as the responsibility as opposed to emotion. They can take out the opinions and just focus on what is being done and why it's important. This can influence funding, but also at the same time, this can also have an impact on reversing what is oftentimes termed the fear of science. This is one of those things that occurs when people are intimidated by science, but if they feel as though they are part of the process or they have that understanding of it, they're less afraid and they feel that there are no barriers to their understanding, and therefore they can make those decisions as opposed to leaving them in somebody else's hands. So we have all of these reasons why science communication is important. On the other side, we understand that there can be some challenges associated with it. And a number of those challenges that are associated with science communication are as follows. Science in and of itself is a tricky field. All of us are there, we've gone through the classes, we've done the research. We understand that it's not as easy a topic to grasp the first time around. I presume, like myself, you've had those occasions where you've gone and your family members or friends have asked you, oh, what is it that you do? And so then you go into this spiel about what it is that you do, and suddenly their eyes start glossing over, and you realize that though you think what you're saying makes sense, to them it doesn't. And so oftentimes that ability to get that information across can be difficult. And that also can lead to that idea of fear of science, because you get that, oh, I never liked science, it was just too tough. So sometimes that can be a barrier that causes this idea of science communication to be difficult. There's also the loss of credibility and authority that sciences can have. And this is oftentimes what occurs when it appears that scientists have an agenda that they would like to get across, and it's more so that they're prioritizing acclaim or fame as opposed to the academics that are associated with science. Many times we are looked at as pillars of truth and knowledge, and what we are doing is in the pursuit of discovery and this knowledge. But if a scientist becomes too famous, as can also happen with celebrities, as we all know, sometimes that credibility can be lost because it looks as though you're going for fame and fortune as opposed to the academics and the pursuit of knowledge. There's also the deficit model. And this model makes the assumption that educating the public will reverse negative attitudes towards science. However, it doesn't take into account personal opinions and personal attitudes. Therefore, you can't really correlate reversing a negative view based on providing somebody knowledge. There can be a lot more that we don't think about when somebody has a negative view of science. However, this gap in between what people know versus what they believe or their attitudes, it can't be traversed simply by telling somebody an idea or giving them suggestions or explaining an idea to them. There's a lot more that's in play there. However, if we keep this idea and this mindset that so long as we tell people what they should know, they're going to change their mind and they're going to be in our favor, that's going to keep these barriers open, and therefore we're going to still have difficulties. And then there's also the difficulty of attracting new audiences. Many times, whether or not you say are at a science festival, or if you're giving a seminar, or if you're at a conference, many of the people who are there are scientists and they already have an interest in science. Even if they're not scientists, they might already have a burgeoning interest. And it can oftentimes be difficult to attract a new audience to science if they're not already there. And also the way that we think about science and how we might think about it in the general public is different. Here I show these two pyramids, and it's this idea of the inverted pyramid, the way that we think about discussing science as opposed to the way that would be more attractive to an audience. So they really care more so about why does it matter, the implications, then you give them the details of how you went through that process, and then you can give them the entire history of what you're doing. However, we really like to go into the crux of what is the history of what we're trying to do? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are the past references to what we're doing? And then we get to that point where we say why this is important. Oftentimes, the public wants to know why do we care first, when we're trying to get to the point of we want you to have all this background information, then you can know why we care. So there are challenges in the way that we also just communicate in the language of science that can also make it difficult to attract a new audience. However, there are some ways that you can bypass this, and there are a number of different modes that you can use to communicate science that might be beneficial and can help in the process of trying to communicate with different audiences. One of those is through traditional journalism. So we have newspaper, radio, TV, magazine, traditional medias that we have had for decades, some in case of centuries. Some of the advantages to these modes is that you can reach a large number of people. Also, the production is high quality. So there's vetting, there's formatting. It's a very nice packaged way to produce a set of information. And then in reality, framing the message, what it is that you want to get across as the agenda is set in advance. So you already are prepared, you know what the topics are going to be, therefore it gives you an opportunity to be able to convey those messages. However, again, as I mentioned previously, you can often be limited to those who are already interested in science. And so the audience that you have is not as diverse as you might, including people who don't necessarily have that initial interest. Also, the topics tend to be more of what is scientific trend, or they might be what's in the news. So we can think about vaccines or climate change. Not all of us are into research about vaccines, and not all of us are doing research in climate change and renewable energies. So that might leave some of us out, myself included. But there are other ways we can communicate our chemistry if we aren't on those hot topic buttons. You have a lack of control over the coverage, so how far and how vast the information that you're presenting gets, as well as how the audience interprets it. We know that in print, or sometimes when you don't have that ability to communicate, because this also is a form of one-way communication, it's hard for you to have that back and forth so that if somebody misinterprets what you say, you can come back and say, this was actually what I meant, and have that conversation, that dialogue. So sometimes that can be missing in this arena and these modes of communication. And also, because it's glossier, because this is high quality production in regards to a short, maybe a short piece or a small time frame, there's less in-depth focus. So you don't really get into those nitty-gritty details that we as scientists like to talk about. We still have to just go with the why does it matter? And sometimes for us, that's not enough because there's more interest in there and there are more things that we want to discuss, but in some cases, you don't get to have that opportunity. We have live events like the festivals that I've mentioned and the one that we're going to this weekend, and science cafes. These are great because, again, you have a vast and diverse audience. Here you get that two-way communication and those two-way interactions between scientists and the public, which we really are aiming for, which is great. And the scientists, you control the content. So whatever you want to frame as your message, that is what you can pass forward. However, we are again limited to a grouping of individuals who are interested in science as opposed to that more diverse audience that includes people who might not have that initial interest. There's a lot of reinvention with these modes because the resources need to remain relevant and interesting. Sometimes there are new types of demos that you can do or new discussion topics that you can have based on what's current and what's of interest at the time. And therefore, you have to make sure that you are as up-to-date and relevant as possible. And then you're catering to audiences with specific interests. So you might not be talking about, for example, in a science cafe, you might be talking about climate change because that is of big interest to people these days. However, that might not be your area of expertise, and therefore your comfort level in that area might not be as high as it would be if you were talking about your subject. However, that is not what you were there to do, and so there can be some disadvantages with that. However, again, like I said, not all modes are created equal, and in some cases, you can introduce your topics of interest into these different modes. We also have online social media, which is way more relevant and important, and our lab got onto Twitter and now we're over 100 followers, so it's becoming important in a lot of different labs and a lot of different areas in science, and so it's becoming big and an important avenue for people to take because you do have an audience of millions all over the world, especially, which is really important. Scientists control the content. What you put out there is all based on what you want to do, and you have access to your audience 24/7. As long as you're awake and your thumbs are clicking, you can talk to anybody at any time you want. You have the option of one-way or two-way communication. If you want to have conversations, Facebook Live, if you want to have that real-time interaction, it is available to you. However, we do have the disadvantage of the modes of, or the ways that your information can be interpreted by an audience, though in this format, it's a little bit easier for you to have that back and forth where you can kind of flush out those ideas and explain what it is that you're talking about or your point of view. The interactions are a little lighter because it is a very short time frame in which you're communicating. And so you might lose the value of credible information because you don't get to go into as much depth and you don't get into the heavy details. And also regular maintenance. That upkeep can be difficult when you're in the lab, when you're teaching, a lot of different things. So if you don't have the time to do regular maintenance or to keep yourself current and relevant because posting once a month is not going to work as well, then this might not be the way for you to go. And then we have presentations. This is really what I consider the scientist's wheelhouse. We've been built to give presentations at conferences and meetings and seminars. We've practiced this mode of communication for a long time, and therefore scientists tend to be much more effective in this presentation mode than any other. And then you have options. You can do panels, you can do posters, you can do an oral presentation. So there are a lot of different activities that you can do in these areas. However, as I feel like I seem to be telling you guys this a lot, you tend to be limited to a scientific audience. Some people do come in who are from the outside who have an interest, but again, we're not attracting a new audience to these different modes of communication, which can be troublesome or problematic for us. And also the style of communication is not necessarily ideal for a non-specialist audience because again, we are there's a lot of jargon, and the vernacular that we use as scientists can oftentimes go over the heads of a non-specialist audience. And so we can find that it's difficult for us to communicate in these different scientific modes, or these scientific presentations, particularly with a non-specialist audience. Therefore, some other modes might be better for that. But in reality, all these modes of communication, there's a bit of give and take. And in reality, the idea is finding which one is most effective for you to use when you go about this process of science communication. And so when we think about how it is that we want to effectively communicate, we really have to think about particular strategies for science communication. And the first step is development. At this point, the goals or the desired outcomes that you have for not only the audience that you're going to be talking to or engaging with, but also you as the coordinators, the volunteers. First, you define these goals, and then you plan your activities last. So if we think about this, what we're really talking about is for your audience, if you want to be able to convey a particular topic to them, if you want them to come away with a take-home message, this is the development stage. And what it is that you want to get as coordinators. It might be as simple as you just want to gain experience talking to the public about science, or there could be a much more specific goal that you have in mind of how you want to approach the process. But here, in this case, what we're looking at is first initially defining what it is that we want to achieve with this and what we want the overall goal to be. And then from there we build, and then we decide what activities we're going to do, looking at different modes of communication to see which ones would be most effective for that process or those goals that we have outlined for ourselves. Then we have implementation, in which we look at the different modes of communication, as I discussed previously, and we look at the ones that are attention grabbing and can also be interactive. The more connection an audience can have with the science that you are presenting through these interactions, the more impactful the experience. I've found that at science festivals, when you're especially talking to kids, they don't necessarily understand everything that you're talking about, but they remember those attention-grabbing details. And that can trigger something down the line and can have more of an impact than people tend to realize. And so really, the goal of implementation is active engagement. However you decide, whichever mode you feel is best for you to put forth those goals and desired outcomes that you have, you want to make sure that the engagement is active, and you want to make sure that your audience is engaged in whatever it is that you're doing. Then maybe for some, their favorite part, some others I can definitely say not, is the evaluation. So once you've completed your activity, you do an evaluation to see if those outcomes that you had initially put in place were achieved. And this one can be tricky depending on what mode of communication you decide to use. Pre and post surveys oftentimes can be helpful for both your audience as well as the coordinators. And these are oftentimes used for a lot of different informal science education and communication events, but sometimes it's difficult. At a science cafe or a science festival, for example, it can be difficult to pass out a survey before somebody does a demo and afterwards and ask them to write things down when you're talking to them for about 2 minutes at a time. So not always the best, but you can also embed questions. So I'll talk to you a bit about what we've done in the modes of, or the aspect of evaluation, in hopes of trying to see if doing these demonstrations can be effective and can be useful for an audience. And so with that, I will get back to the big question that we had for our center. And the question was, again, how do we brand CCHF chemistry to a non-specialist audience? How do we get them engaged in this idea of CH bond activation, which is not necessarily the easiest topic to discuss or to understand, but how do we get them engaged? And what I can say is that I don't know. I've been doing this for about 2 years, and we don't know. We really don't know how to brand our chemistry and tailor it to a non-specialist audience, at least particularly in the case of a science festival. This is not the place, and we've learned that this is not the place for us to try and go on a spiel about CCHF chemistry, why CH bond activation is important, et cetera, et cetera. But we have found that the science festivals in and of themselves can have an alternative impact, which has been beneficial to us and has helped us realize that branding of CCHF chemistry, we do need different modes that are more pertinent and more relevant to an audience that would be able to understand it. But even with that, I will go through the approaches that we've used in those 3 strategies for communication to show you what it is that we've done, and in hopes maybe that can help you along when you decide the process that you want to take. So when we think about development, so going back and thinking about what our desired outcomes and goals are, what we want to do is a number of things. We want to first address the real world context to ensure a personal connection. The big question that you will get from an audience, though they may not say it this way, is why do we care? That's the big thing. That's what's going to sell them on what it is that you're talking about. That's what's going to bring them in and listening to what you say. So we talk about the applications, in this case of plastics and polymers, the fact that they are ubiquitous. We find them in every place, from plastics to our hair to wood and even DNA. We then try to introduce an idea that can open the door to discussing CH bond activation. So we can talk about how these structures are different. We can talk about functional groups in a more simplistic term, and we can get through this process of explaining how changing these functional groups can change the different types of macromolecules you can make. And what we're trying to do is add another type of functional group into the toolbox of functional groups that we currently have. And this new functional group will be a CH bond. And we can explain why that is complicated and why we want to introduce that. Then we try to connect the concepts to the theme of CCHF chemistry. So we have all of these polymers and we want to introduce this new functional group, or we classify as a new functional group, which is a CH bond. And why is this important? Because it allows us to explore new polymers that can be used for a lot of different things. We connect it to our audience, thinking about computer screens and flat panel displays, so that they understand that all of this chemistry that you cannot see, that's more of the microscopic, leads to this macroscopic effect. Then we go into implementation. And so the ways that we go about that is using a variety of different demos. And what we do is that we want to make this as interactive and engaging as possible to our audience. And so what we do is we have these informational pamphlets that we provide to our audience, so that when they come up to do the demo, they are as engrossed in it as we are. So what we start off with is step-by-step directions, so that they know what they're doing at each step. So if we were to allow them to go to the side and do this experiment, they could do it on their own. And then we also interject these directions with these observation moments, so that they can start thinking like a scientist, making observations about what they see, what they hear, what they feel, so that they know what the process is that we go through when we go writing our experiments in our notebooks, for example. Then we give an explanation as to what's happening throughout the experiment, so they understand, or they can get a sense of what is occurring as the experiment is going on, as opposed to just seeing, for example, in this case, snow polymer, which is the absorbent material that you find in diapers. As opposed to just seeing it expand, now they can understand why it's expanding and what is occurring. Then we provide the information for them to be able to do this at home, so that when parents take their kids home, they can do these experiments on their own, and they can do a little bit more exploration with these different topics. So this also includes additional questions, so that when they do the experimenting at home, they can start asking these probing questions, and it'll actually give them more time than the few minutes that they are with us to do these experiments and start trying different things. So what happens if you let the snow polymer dry? It goes back to its original state, original consistency. Or if you use tap water versus distilled water, or even if you use salt water or add salt, seeing what these different things do, so that they can really experiment and have that experience of being a scientist. And then we also add vocabulary, so that they can put into context what all of this means, understanding what these words are that we talk about. So if we say polymer, now they understand what a polymer is. And rather than just hearing the word polymer, they can connect it to something. So in this case, looking at the different subunits of a polymer as the cars of a train. So now they can look at it and say, okay, I know that the more cars you have, the longer the chain is. And then they can get this analogy and get this context for what it means or what we're talking about when we're referring to a polymer, and going through this process so that they have this vocabulary. And even if it's nothing that they remember off the top of their head, at least they have these pieces of paper where they can refer back to them if they want to continue experimenting. And then we go about the process of evaluation. So I mentioned that this is a little difficult at a science festival because we're not standing out there passing out pamphlets or passing out surveys, pre or post surveys, to ask them, do you like this, or what did you get from this, and asking them a bunch of questions that they don't have time to answer. What we've used is this product called Happy or Not. And I like it because, as you can see, it gives you 4 options for you to choose from, which are basic. A kid can understand this. Either you were happy, or you were upset, or somewhere in between. And so you can ask simple questions when you think about what goals it is that you've set. So for us, some of the questions we had are, did you enjoy the activities that you did? Or would you come back to a festival? Because sometimes it's as simple as, was anything that you learned here, was there enough of it for you to encourage you to come back? Do you like science, or do you think you can be or want to be a scientist? Simple questions that allow us just to get a sense of how their experience at our booth made them feel. This is not necessarily always the best mode of evaluation, especially when you're trying to give metrics to, say, the NSF, because they want to see how effective your programs are. But it can at least give us a sense of if we're trending in the right direction. And so for the festivals, though we aren't really doing demos for the audience that are necessarily in the realm of CCHF chemistry, what we're doing is we're introducing kids to science. And I've learned that that should be the primary goal that we have for these festivals. And from the evaluations that we've been able to do so far, it seems as though what we're doing is introducing science to an audience of kids, and they are enjoying it. Now, if we want to pursue this concept of communicating CCHF chemistry to an audience, it definitely would be more appropriate, say, for example, doing a science cafe with adults or teenagers. But in this grand scheme of things, the approach and the simplest avenue that we have for introducing chemistry is through science festivals. And so we're working within the mode that we have in order to be able to effectively communicate the science that we do in as simple a way as possible. But that's for us, and that is what we've been trying to do. The thing is that in the case of all of you, if you decide that you want to do science communication, as you've seen, there are a number of different ways you can go about it. What you really need to figure out first is what it is that you want to accomplish, and then what you hope to achieve from those goals that you set for yourself. So with that, I have a couple of tips and strategies that I think will help you as you go along when you try to go through those strategies of communication in first development, then going to implementation, and then eventually evaluation. So the first tip that I have is identify your audience. You can have kids that are of Dora the Explorer age, or who are fascinated by Dora Explorer. You can go all the way to what they classify as, actually, I guess what they classify the grouping as is K through gray, which I don't know why that's the term that's used, but we're talking about from young children to senior citizens. Know who it is that you're talking to and identify the people that you're trying to engage with. Because the important thing is understanding that grouping and understanding how to communicate with that grouping of people. You should also make sure that you know your audience, know their level of background with what you're discussing. Some groups will have significantly advanced knowledge in an area that you're talking about. Some may have none at all, but you want to make sure that no matter what area they're from or what their knowledge background is, that you're catering to everybody that you're going to be talking to, especially if you're going into an arena that is as diverse as a science festival, for example. And then framing your message. What is it that you want to get out to the public? Is this going to be a matter of you telling them something, or you just giving them the tools that they need to form those opinions for themselves? You have to decide that first, because you want to make sure that when you're in that event, having that engagement and that interaction, that what your audience comes away with is exactly what you want them to have. You want to make sure that there's no room for misinterpretation. So if you're just providing information, let that be it. But if you want to have that dialogue and you want to have that open-ended discussion, make sure that also occurs. And in both regards, you can make the activities interactive. What you really want to do is you want to make sure that your audience is engaged, that they're having the opportunity to communicate with you, and they're also having fun in that communication. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, you just might want to upgrade it a little bit. There's a lot of resources that are available online, a lot of resources. So instead of trying to completely come up with something new that has never been done before, you might want to start small with something that has been done, but make it your own. Make it something that you're comfortable with and that you're able to present effectively. And then as you get comfortable with the process, you can go into trying to do new things, especially when you get to that point of trying to make your science the avenue in which you communicate. You also want to consider your medium. As I told you, CCHF chemistry and science festivals don't necessarily mix, but we can find ways of introducing CCHF chemistry to an audience. Now, if we want that to be the mainstay and the focal point of what we do, we need a new medium. So you have to be diligent in finding that. And it can be an iterative process, a lot of trial and error, but it is possible and can be done. What you also want to do is know your intent, what it is that you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to accomplish. As long as you have those blinders on and that focus, it'll make the process a lot easier. And then you want to consider the broader impacts. What is it that you're trying to achieve? I'd mentioned, is it a matter of passing on information, or do you really want to open this up to having this dialogue? Consider what it is the impact that what you're doing is going to have in the long run. And this is not only for yourself, but for your audience, but also for you as the communicators and coordinators. And then embrace the process. It can be difficult, but that's okay. And what you learn is a brand new set of skill sets that'll help you not even just with communicating science, but will also help you down the line when you are doing a lot of different things, whether or not it is that you continue in this direction or not. The skill sets that you learn will be invaluable to you in the long run. And then the biggest one, which sometimes can be difficult, is to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help because not only is it going to help you be better, but it's also giving others the opportunity to be involved and to learn about that process. And what we know is that what we really want to do is have as many scientists as possible learning how to effectively communicate with the public so that in the end, we can have a better relationship and we can have this dialogue with the public that's going to help in the long run, whether it's in the ideas of getting funding for policy, or if it's just helping or making the world a more informed and overall better place. So asking for help is always a good thing. But remember, have fun with your process and have fun with the experience, because you're going to be putting a lot of yourself into it. So you want to make sure that you enjoy it as much as possible, because if you have the joy, your audience is going to feel that and they're going to return that joy to you, and it's just going to be a pleasurable experience overall. So with that, I have a number of people to thank, a mini collage of the people that I've worked with over the years, including my group here, who helped with the San Diego Science Festival, which again, we're going to this year, and people that I've worked with in San Francisco, a number of the Centers for Chemical Innovation, which is one of the centers that, or one of the CCHF is one of those, the Centers for Chemical Innovation that's funded by NSF. And all of the people that I've gotten a chance to meet doing these festivals, all the kids, all the adults who have come to our booths, my advisor for giving us the opportunity to do this. And I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Hello.
Hello?
Hi, my name is Victoria.
Hi.
So I have a question in regards, earlier you mentioned how your laboratory recently started a Twitter, so like join the social media.
Uh-huh.
Since it's not as formal as publishing an article, what then are the process, or is the process to approve of what you can post on your social media?
That is a very, very good question. And I will admit to you, that's one of the things that we've had a number of discussions about ourselves. I don't know if there's necessarily any rules that are in place currently. What we have decided is that we would not put anything on there that is related to our research specifically, just because we don't want there to be an instance in which, we might get scooped by another group, or if we might inadvertently scoop ourselves, and because we put that information out there initially, it makes it more difficult to publish our stuff. So we definitely like to keep it as informal as possible. So we limit it to if an article was already published by our group, announcing that, if anybody graduates, if we do any events that we do, and if we do any sort of science that we do put on our social media, it tends to be experiments that have already been done, more of the laboratory demos that you would do. For example, we did a base titration with phenolphthalein for the International Girls and Women in Science Day. So we put that up on our social media, but that's a general experiment that everybody's done. So we kind of limit it to the things that aren't involved in the actual scientific research in our labs. And I think that's also something that's very important for you to discuss with your advisor, because again, there is that gray area. So it's all a matter of what your lab is most comfortable with at the time. But I tend to say that staying away from your research as much as possible is the best bet.
Hi, my name is Helen. And
Hi, Helen.
So I know that you showed us one method with which you test how people responded with a smiley face or two neutral faces or a sad face or whatever. But I was just wondering if you have any other methods to collect data on how people respond to specific ways with which you present your information and like the events and the information itself.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the case of the science festivals, no. Just because in those instances, it's very difficult to get real concrete information in the correct amount of time, or at least in those interactions. But so a number of things that we've done, sort of panel discussions, and what else have we done? Yeah, panel discussions, or any kind of commentary or sort of seminars that we do actually have full-length evaluations that we give to students to see if the method of communication has been effective, ways that we can improve that method. So surveys tend to be the best way to do that. It's just the avenue in which you're working can be the main factor in whether or not you use those surveys and those evaluations. So like for science festivals, definitely not. That one we really just want to see if people are having fun, because we are dealing with about 95% of them are kids. So we really just want to see if they're having fun. So if they press the green button, at least we know they've had a good time. But when it comes to actually doing the demos and seeing if they're effective, when we do those in small test markets, so if we're just doing them amongst ourselves, that's where we try to fine tune and see if we're doing those things appropriately. Or if we do things in smaller instances with smaller groups, maybe a high school, for example, then we can go in and actually do evaluations and see if we are presenting the information in a way that is really helping them understand what it is that we're talking about. Because at least in those cases, we're more focused on them understanding the concepts as opposed to just enjoying the fact that they've seen something blow up or something like that.
Actually, I had a question. Okay. I'm Abraham.
Hi, Abraham.
So I know in like 2012, there was a group that started trying to correct scientific mistakes in movies.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I picked my field because of a video game. But do you know if you were personally involved in that kind of stuff? Because I know that group organization has reached a lot of different universities.
To my knowledge, no. I know I personally have not. And I don't think that we've been involved in that. But that's actually really cool. I've never heard of that before. Do you know what the name of that is? I'm sorry, I think you passed the microphone already.
I actually forgot the name, but I know they helped with the writing of Interstellar and Arrival.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, we haven't participated in any of that stuff. But no, I think that's also one of the things that's cool, because like, for example, they have physicists who, I don't know if any of you watch The Big Bang Theory or ever have, but they have they have physicists who are behind the scenes who are working to make sure that even the equations that they write on the board are accurate. So that's really a good way of trying to make sure that at least the information being passed out to the public is more accurate than what they see, because in some cases, I'm sure you've had the instance of watching a movie or something and you just shake your head and go, I don't understand why they did that. But no, that's really cool. That's a good idea. We should try something like that.
Hello, my name is Irene.
Hi, Irene.
Hi. And I was just building off of the question that Tori had. Is there any way to evaluate the feedback or the success rate of using Twitter or other social media as a way of spreading information? I know you're targeting children, but have you been able to maybe, I mean, kids probably don't have Twitter accounts, or at least I hope not, but
yeah.
Are their parents being reached? You know, how do we know that this is actually working?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing that we don't know because what you realize, especially with Twitter and things like that, unless, you know, for example, you're a celebrity or something, especially in the sciences, your circle is very insular, so it tends to be other scientists who end up following you, and so you don't really get out there in more of the world in which you would have that interaction with parents. And you know what? To be honest, I've never actually really thought about that, and never thought about trying to communicate and get in and make sure that the parents who come to our booth are actually following us and stuff like that. So you've actually just given me a really good idea.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That is great. Because no, that is really important. Being able to see if you are reaching, or if that reach is extended beyond just the interactions you have at the moments in the science festivals. So we've never looked at that, but that is something really, really good to consider. Thank you. That's a great idea.
Hello, my name is Dylan.
Hi, Dylan.
I'm starting to be a high school teacher in chemistry, physics, and mathematics, and I was just curious, to what extent do you make your resources available for elementary or high school classrooms so that the teachers can showcase maybe something other than the standard experiments, maybe focusing on more recent research?
So we haven't done that yet. That has been, for me, that was the big crux, my big project. The legacy that I wanted to have when I left the center was trying to actually form kits that could incorporate CCHF chemistry into demos that we could pass on to students, to teachers, so that they could integrate them into lessons that they did in the classroom. That's the biggest goal that we have. The problem is that we still haven't gotten past the point of how do we make CCHF or CH bond activation a tangible idea in chemistry that can be utilized at many different levels outside of, you know, the graduate level, university level. So I'm still working on that, but that was actually the target. We really wanted to make sure that this kind of information, especially because it's, you know, we're dealing with more modern techniques in chemistry, we wanted to make that accessible to people of all ages, and so that was available.
Hi, my name is Obed. I had a quick question about your science festivals. You mentioned it a couple of times. I see you have some photos here. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little more on what exactly, what specific groups attend these science festivals and have, I guess, booths or something like that, and what organization sponsors these science festivals?
Okay, I'll start with sponsors. We have a number of different sponsors. So I've never heard of them before this year. The Biocom Institute, I guess they're in San Diego. They're one of the major sponsors, but you have like the NSF and NIH. You have different science organizations that are sponsors. The different types of booths, across the board, you have people who are from industry, you have from academia, you have, a lot of times you'll see labs from different universities who are there, but you have a wide gamut of pharmaceuticals. Anybody who so much as wants to participate in a science festival will have a booth there. So like, for example, San Diego, the Expo Day. So we do our festival at the Expo Day. That's when you have everybody who comes in. It's a free event, and you have over 20,000 people who come through. So you have a lot of different groups that are coming through, all ages. You have You have people who are still pushing kids in strollers, all the way to one year we had, he was a priest. He was an 80-year-old priest from Ireland who came, and he taught at a Catholic boys' school in Ireland, and he was just here for the festival, and it was in San Francisco. He came for the festival because he wanted to look for different demos that he could present to his class. So you get a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds who come to these, which makes them fun, but also can be challenging when you're trying to go through this process of communicating with a wide audience. But you have a lot of people who come through. Oftentimes, one year we were doing the same demo as another group, so sometimes you have some repetition in that, but with 20,000 plus people, not everybody's going to see everything. I don't know. Did I answer all of your questions? There might be more to it. Was there any more?
Okay, well, we want to thank you very much.
Right.
And
Thank you very much. Thank
we
you.
wish you a great transition to your new job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any job.
Thank you. And thank you very much for all of you being here. I appreciate it. Thank you.